All right, let's talk Texas Longhorns. Obviously, a thrilling, at least, finish to that home victory over Vanderbilt. Texas is trending in the right direction with a big matchup coming up. And to that end, after the win, they got some outstanding news that will be critical for the Longhorns' success going forward. We'll get to all of that reporting in just 1 second. But first, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, obviously a crazy kind of wild game. Texas was clearly better throughout the vast majority of the game, but Vanderbilt, to their credit, it's a feisty team, really good quarterback. They made it very, very spicy down the stretch. Texas did just enough to hold on. Obviously, one of the big storylines throughout the game was an injury at a key player, and considering who's up next for this Longhorn squad, you have Georgia and then A&M to finish out the season and must-win games in order to get back to the college football playoff. Being healthy is paramount, and they got great news on that front. Let's pull up this article courtesy of Burnt Orange Nation. After the number 20 Texas Longhorns defeated the number 9 Vanderbilt Commodores in a 34-31 victory, Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian revealed that the thumb injury sustained by sophomore wide receiver Ryan Wingo was not significant. In an emergency, he could have went back in today, Sarkisian said. Wingo opened up the game with a 75-yard catch and run touchdown on the first play from scrimmage, but suffered a thumb injury on another screen midway through the first quarter. All right, so obviously the Wingo injury, you could kind of tell, especially in the second half, it did feel the lack of explosive playmaking from the offense. And listen, obviously Texas was able to hold on. Arch Manning had a nice game, and Vanderbilt's a good football team, right? Obviously they've played everybody tough. They've beat a lot of good teams themselves. Listen, the only team that beat Vanderbilt prior to yesterday was the Alabama Crimson Tide in Tuscaloosa, right? And Vandy had a lead in that game in the first half, so that was one of those obviously games that could have gone either way. And Vanderbilt, like we've seen so far this season, very tough, very frisky football team, very well coached, as I'm sure a lot of you UT fans saw yesterday on Saturday when the Longhorns played them. But I think what we have to look at for Texas is what's in front of them. And of course, you have Georgia next week in a massive game, an absolutely massive game. But I really like Texas's chances if they have their playmakers. Anyone who has watched Georgia play this season understands that their defense, while good, gives up a lot of big plays, gives up a lot of yardage. They rely on being clutch. Same thing with their offense. And I think what Texas has shown, specifically over the last 3 weeks, is they have that clutch gene. Obviously, it's been ugly, but they got it done against Kentucky. It was ugly, big comeback necessary, but they got it done against Mississippi State. And while it was relatively pretty for 3 quarters against Vanderbilt, it got ugly down the stretch, but they found a way to get it done, survive, of course, against Vanderbilt to go to accomplish a 34-31 victory. Now, look, everything that the goals of Texas are all in front of them, right? They win out, they get into the college football playoff, and we'll see what happens from there. It's not going to be easy to do, but I like them to beat Georgia, especially with a guy like Wingo back into the fold. I think this Texas Longhorns offense, they have the playmakers. Sarkisian is a guy who obviously is a very good play designer, and Arch Manning is starting to figure it out a little bit, right? We've seen it since really the second half of the Mississippi State game, him playing consistently better and better. And as much a lot of people have heaped a lot of criticism on Arch Manning, the reality is this is still his first year starting, right? He has more hype and more attention on him than any young quarterback in probably recent history because of his last name. The expectations are through the roof. If you look at his numbers, they're not terrible. And obviously, watching him play sometimes this year has not been great. But the reality is he's getting better. This Texas team is getting better, and they're finding ways to win. I thought in prior years with, last two, Ewers era Texas Longhorns teams, I'll just say it like that, they were a team that beat you up. They could blow you out the water. But when it came time to those close games, those finding ways to win moments, those clinch genes, they didn't have it all the time. They just didn't seem to have it in those big moments, right? Now I think they do, guys. I mean, you could honestly make that Arizona State playoff game is probably the one exception, to be honest. What, that 4th and 13? I think that's the only big close game Texas won over the past couple seasons prior to this year. Maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me in the comment section below if I am. But this year just feels different, right? It's not pretty. They're not dominating people, but they're finding ways to win. It's that clutch gene. When people look at the dynasties in the SEC and the great teams, if you look at the early Florida Urban Meyer teams, they were known for being clutch, for gutsy, right? Not very pretty. The early Nick Saban teams, very, very similar. Gutsy, tough, finding ways to win any way you can. Offense, defense, special teams, coming down to the wire, holding off with crazy comebacks, right? That was those early dynastic SEC teams of this century. That's how they were designed to win. That's how they had to win games. We kind of get lost in this era where you have to beat everybody 50-0 to be considered a good team. Folks, sometimes the best teams are teams that just, I don't know, win the games. And the SEC is a brutal gauntlet of a schedule. And right now, Texas, they're doing it. Oklahoma was a really good team. Texas found a way to win that one, turning it on in the second half. Offense, defense, special teams. Clutch win against Kentucky. Clutch win against Mississippi State. And obviously not quite as clutch against Vandy, but they did just enough to make sure they secured the win after a really strong first three quarters. This is a very, very good Texas team. And obviously, after the way the offense looked and the disappointing performance against Florida, a lot of people wrote them off. I think that's premature. I think we're seeing a Longhorns team, especially with Wingo being healthy, that has the playmakers to beat anybody. They've got the coach to beat anybody, and they've got a young quarterback that's playing better, not to mention just an arsenal of front seven playmakers on defense. And of course, a good back end as well in the secondary. Now, listen, they're not perfect. Again, they got that great back end I just mentioned. The secondary had a rough time in the second half against Vanderbilt, right? They've got their flaws, they've got their warts, but they also have the mental toughness to overcome them. And I think, especially this upcoming game against Georgia, and then 2 weeks from that against A&M, they're going to need that, and they're perfectly suited to handle it. They've been through the adversity, the entire season. They are battle tested, maybe more than any Texas team in recent memory, and that'll give them the resources to draw on to, I think, finish the season strong. I like their chances next week against Georgia. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Texas fans, in the comment section below, obviously kind of a more thrilling end to the game than maybe you would have hoped, but you still got the win. That is all that matters, of course. Give us your MVP of the Longhorns' victory against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Could go a bunch of different directions here, but give us the one guy you think stood out the most. Put him in the comment section below. But without further ado, Mize, I will hand it off over to you now. Give us your thoughts on all things Texas.
Yeah, Nick, I think the what you said about Texas finding a way to win is definitely been evident in the last 3 weeks or so. It's like this game versus Vanderbilt, close one. They're able to get the win 34-31. So field goal game there. Going back to last week, Mississippi State, overtime victory there. Going back to Kentucky, another overtime victory. This is a team in 3 straight weeks has been able to get the job done. And, talking about Arch Manning, like you said, Manning has had two back-to-back really strong performances, super high grades when you look at his PFF grades, 80 plus grades there for him. He's looking really, really good. Oh, and guess what? They're versus good teams. They're versus an SEC opponent and a top 10 opponent as well. You go back this season and look, his other really high grades this year against Sam Houston and against San Jose State, which is not necessarily the kind of competition that you're trying to, perform against. You want to see him perform against competition like SEC opponents, top 10 opponents like Vanderbilt. Of course, they had a really great game against Oklahoma, but I think the Oklahoma one was, Mateer coming back from injury, probably came back a little bit too early. They're given a lot of gifts with those 3 interceptions. So that one a little bit on edge, but still had a good performance as well. So I think, like you said, Arch Manning's putting it together. We're seeing Texas do a lot of really strong stuff down the stretch. And I think the key here, like you said, getting that explosiveness, Ryan Wingo coming back from injury, looking really, really strong for Texas, that if they can have him back for Georgia, that would be a huge one. Also, junior safety Jelani McDonald is suffered an injury in the first half. He's expected to be back for Georgia as well. And redshirt safety Michael Tafi should be coming back from thumb surgery as well. So, couple of guys coming back from injury for Texas as well. Just get some depth, get some starters back into this roster before this game against Georgia, which, mind you, this is a Georgia matchup where they got a little bit of a bye week in between. They don't have to play next weekend, so time to rest up, get healthy, and we'll see what happens down the stretch for them. But everything is looking good for Texas. Arch Manning's playing. The injuries, they were able to come out with very little to no injuries as far as people being back ready in time for Georgia. This is a team that's on, a 4-game winning streak. They're looking really hot. They've got a tough schedule ahead of them, but it's like some teams, they start out really hot and they fizzle middle of the season. Texas started pretty slow, I'd say. They're against some opponents. Arch Manning didn't look good at the beginning of the season. They lose to Florida. They start this slow burn. Now they're playing their best football right now with 3 games left in the season. Like you said, must-win games, but it's looking like they now can win those games. I have confidence that Texas can put up a very strong performance against a Georgia, against a Texas A&M, and come out on top in those performances. And like you said, if it's a close game, they feel like they can find the ways to win, especially with a guy like Wingo, the explosiveness they have on the offense. So things are looking really great for Texas. And I think just overall, this team is in a strong spot, much stronger than they have been in the past, to make an actual push for the college football playoff and potentially to make it in to that national championship game.
Yeah, and then talk about battle tests, and I just pulled up some of the schedules and the results here. Obviously, you've got Texas played three top 10 teams. At the time, they're 2-1 against them. Vanderbilt, Oklahoma wins. Obviously, one score loss at Ohio State, which right now looks like the best loss in college football. I mean, I don't think there's a thing as a good loss, but we know in the rankings and things like that, it does matter. So, 7-point loss at Ohio State, the closest game right now that Ohio State has played outside of that one was an 18-point victory on the road in conference against Washington, a good Washington team. So we're looking at Texas, a lot of people will forgive that loss against Ohio State week one in Columbus. And you look down the rest of their schedule. Look, they have two top five opponents left in Georgia and Texas A&M. But right now they got two top 10 wins, right? Let's say they drop one of those games, Georgia or Texas A&M. They finish 9-3. So they would have three top 10 wins. If you look at the schedule here for Georgia, they have looking at their results, they've got one top 10 win, right? And maybe they'll get a second against Georgia Tech if they play Georgia Tech at the end of the year. Maybe, right? You look at Ole Miss, they've got, looking at their schedule, one top 10 win. You look at, of course, Alabama, right? They're having a good season, feeling pretty good about themselves. They've got one top 10 win, right? You look at the results across the board. And finally, Texas A&M, they've got themselves in their own right, one top 10 win. So if you look at the, resume factor here, and that's going to matter come college football playoff time. It's one of the reasons why a two-loss Miami team last year didn't get in because their resume wasn't very good. I think a 9-3 Texas team with a win over A&M or Georgia, I think they get in this sucker because I think you can make an argument that says, listen, three top 10 wins with that schedule, that's a battle-tested team. Now they would need some things to go their way, but we're seeing a Texas team that's figuring it out. They've got the clutch gene. They've overcome some adversity. I think they're in a really good spot here. Again, they've got the bye, like you mentioned. I think I forgot to mention that, so thank you for bringing that up. So they got 2 weeks to prepare for Georgia. If they beat Georgia and then, of course, handle things against Arkansas, then you go into A&M 9-2. And if you put even if you don't win at A&M against A&M, excuse me, to be honest, I think that's at home in Austin. Even if you lose that game at home, but it's a really close down the wire game, I think a 9-3 Texas team gets in. Now they would need some help, of course, and that's a few weeks down the stretch. But I like what Texas is doing, and I think the rest of the college football world, the playoff committee, all of those guys, they will too, because they understand watching these games what Texas is doing shows that playoff, that championship moxie, that toughness, that mental adversity. Quarterback play is good, coaching is good. Everything everyone wants to see in a playoff team, we're seeing with the Longhorns right now. And if they can stay healthy and these injuries are minor, like we pointed out today, I think they're in a great position to make a serious run down the stretch.